sexiest of topics, but when I thought about it, I realized that passwords are something we all have in common. So, it's common ground, and if you're at a party or something and you make small talk, why not talk about passwords? Just don't give it away.
Not your password.
No. Don't ask for their password either. That's just rude. I'm joined by Amy Perlman, who is the Director of Client Services and IT Procurements.
You are correct, sir.
Thank you. And so Amy has been a really indispensable resource in many ways, but especially regarding information security. So I think she'll really enrich this discussion with her vast experience. So thank you for coming, and thank you for you guys for inviting me to do this talk. So in today's just crazy security climate, I think it always behooves us to continue to reflect on our security posture. Even though last month was National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, we didn't miss the opportunity to talk about passwords. So it's really important for us to continue to look at what security professionals are kind of recommending or prescribing we do, and then taking a look at our own needs and practices and seeing what we can incorporate and what makes sense for us. And I think there are a lot of good password-related best practices that we can easily adopt into our lives. So also before we begin, I know the judgment-free zone was very prevalent in the advertising, so I just wanted to reiterate that this is a judgment-free zone. I know none of you have had compromised accounts, but maybe your password is your cat's name. Or maybe if you share your Netflix password with your significant other, and that same password is the one you use for your online bank account. Even if that's the case, no judgments. You're born again in the password world. So today, I'm hoping that you'll walk away from here being able to confidently create strong passwords and passphrases that you'll use for your college accounts, also your personal accounts, banking accounts, what have you. But also, if you actually use a password manager, you're really going to want to have a very strong password, because that's the only one you'll need. You'll be able to explain the importance of creating strong passwords and passphrases and also securing those properly. Describe the various options you have for securely managing your passwords, and then, hopefully, being able to choose the password management strategy that works best for you. All right. So I have an activity. I'm just doing the activity. All right. So just hold on to that for now.
You also need to tell the camera what you're doing. Yeah.
All right. So who has number one?
Oh, I do not.
Everyone have number one? It's in the lower right-hand corner.
Oh my gosh.
All right, so just read them in order.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay.
Password.
What is it?
Password.
Oh, there's a thing on African art that I'm supposed to go.
Sorry.
Who's next?
Password with a capital P.
Okay.
Well, you have Corey with a capital Q.
I have princess. I have welcome with a capital W.
All right, so what do you guys think those are?
The most
Common passwords.
Yeah. And what's wrong with them? They're common and...
Really? Princess with a capital P is one of the most common passwords?
And probably not even capital. I just capitalized it out of habit. Okay, so they are part of the top 25 worst passwords compiled by this company called Splash Data. They make password management software. So yeah, they're weak, easily guessable, extremely common, and over 10% of people use at least one of these passwords. So that's just setting the landscape for what we're dealing with here. And also they're written on Post-it notes, so that's my doing. So no fault of your own. All right, so we have 3 sections today, and the first 2, I'm confident we're going to get through. The third bit is tidbits, so it'll be kind of a luxury if you have time for that. So we're going to concentrate on creating strong passwords first. So I want you to, I guess we can just all talk about this. Think about what are the consequences of someone getting your password? Just shout them out.
Stealing the things.
Yeah?
Stealing credit card information.
Right. Okay. Yeah? Phishing. Yeah.
Your social security number, depending on where they steal it from.
Mm-hmm.
Can
Right.
steal your whole. Can send you. Can redirect confirmation emails to the themselves.
Yeah.
So in one way or another, the person who has access to your password, who has access to your account, can be you. On social media, that can be used to embarrass you, to damage your reputation. In email, it can also be used to embarrass you or damage your reputation, or to gain access to things that you might put in email, which maybe you shouldn't have put in email to begin with. When it's your Bryn Mawr password, you have access to a lot of data that isn't yours. When it's your household password, you may have access to data that isn't yours. Or if your spouse is sharing a password with you, it could put their identity at risk as well. And really that is just a few of the things, because when someone's able to gather enough information about you, they now have an identity fraud toolkit. And it's your credit that will pay for that. So it's a combination of everything everyone said, plus 10%.
All right, so everything you guys said was painting a very rosy picture. Embarrassment, actually I added that last minute, and that's quite important. So Chris, you mentioned phishing attacks. So you'll see unfortunately very commonly recently, a lot of Bryn Mawr community members will send spam from their accounts. So that can happen in that way. It can also happen in a situation like, maybe not saying Amy's account would ever be compromised, but if it were, someone might act as Amy.
Isn't there a slide about how there's always breaches?
Yeah, true. It's inevitable. It's going to happen.
It's not ever impossible.
Right. So someone might pose as Amy, email me, and say, "Hey, can you click on this?" And coming from Amy, I'll be like, "Oh, okay." Click on it, and now my computer is destroyed.
How many compromised accounts do you think Bryn Mawr's had in the last 72 hours?
72 hours.
You know, it's bad when you're measuring it in hours.
What?
Yeah. 26.
That's actually pretty damn close.
What do I win?
I don't have anything for you to win, Chris. I just wanted to see, we had 17, and then we had another 8, and then we had another 1.
That's 26.
You.
Wow.
Math.
Yeah, so lots of that going on. So one of the consequences that no one said was something called hoffing. So if you don't lock your computer, or if they get your password, they will be able to change your desktop background. Maybe not to David Hasselhoff.
Oh, I love it.
Okay, next question. So for this one, I want you to get into the mind of a cyber criminal. Imagine you are the Hamburglar, and think, what are some ways that you might steal a password if you're trying to do that?
Standing behind someone as they enter there.
Yeah, shoulder surfing.
Yeah, there's a name for that. That's
Yeah.
the sad part.
Yeah.
You could just try all the most common ones.
Yep. Yeah.
You know, then you can try to guess like their cat's name or their birthday or
Right.
One of the most common ways that people get grabbed is exactly what we've been talking about here, which is these phishing attacks or these spear phishing attacks. There's a lot of stuff now that's crossing an email attack with a phone attack. So one of the things I saw most recently is you get a very legitimate looking Amazon message telling you to call this 800 number that is not Amazon. So there's a lot of that kind of thing as well, but social engineering is easily the #1 way to get passwords.
Yeah. And we'll
Did
talk.
anybody talk about like a brute force attack or a multiple guessing machine attacks?
Yeah, just trying.
Yeah. So there is the approach of just a human like me guessing what Helen's password would be. Maybe it's I love knitting or Diet Coke. But there's also more sophisticated ways of doing it.
Either of those your password, change it now.
No. So like Amy was mentioning, computers have gotten really good at being used as password cracking machines. They combine the power of CPUs with also graphic processors, which are really good at doing parallel processes, and they can guess like loads of billions per second. So it's
it changes about every 4 months.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
There's also one other way, which is if through some means a person is able to. So one of the reasons that having your password graph is dangerous, even in a grimoire environment, even though you may not have advanced access to systems, is that if an attacker gets into a system and takes advantage of a vulnerability where they can give themselves more rights, and then they can do more with that server, and that might include getting to the entire list of encrypted passwords, which they could then, there are various ways to get at the basis of that information. So you're never actually supposed to let anybody get that far. But these kind of, they're called rights elevation attacks are one of the risks. But that is a way you can get passwords to more accounts by having gotten password to one account.
Mm-hmm. Right. Cool. All right. So, how do you make your passwords? What's your thought process? So you get that email 30 days
I don't
out.
want to hear the word knitting.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear that.
Yeah. So how do you go about making a new password currently?
Random password generator.
Nice.
Ooh.
Do you use a random password generator for things that you're going to need to type?
Sometimes.
That's really mean to yourself.
It is.
Not that it's not a decent security practice, because it is, but that's hard.
Yeah.
How complex is the password that generates? Is it like actual like dictionary words, or is it just a total random string of characters?
It depends on where you go for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so I tend to gravitate towards password phrases.
Cool.
We'll be talking about that more
Yeah.
in just a moment.
Yeah.
Just priming the pump for you.
A trick I learned from some programmer friends a long time ago is to do it kinetically on the keyboard. So, have a system for, I start with, the letter of something, and then I go around in a particular pattern and move where I start, and the pattern changes kind of thing. Difficulty is that the keyboard on a phone does not match the keyboard on, the iPad does not match the keyboard. Thankfully, our photocopiers now have the same keyboard, which is wonderful.
Wow.
Use your card.
That's very
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, exactly.
This is not supposed to be hard.
So
Okay.
that has worked less.
How long do you make that password when you do
That
that?
has worked less usefully more recently. That's a good question. Let's see. I never have had anything less than 8. I think now it is up to like 16 or so, probably. And again, it's easy to do just because you just keep typing.
Wow.
But works less easily in the modern era.
You must look really cool when you're trying to log in, just like. I was actually reading this study done that was comparing different ways of or effectiveness of snooping on people entering their passwords on their phones, and it was no big surprise that the pattern drawing input method was the easiest to spy on, rather than just like a 4-digit PIN. Is significantly more effective at reducing that shoulder surfing risk. In addition to just you're not leaving the residue on your phone in that exact pattern you're going to see. I have really
You'll notice
greasy
that
hands.
Apple has never implemented that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Apple will not implement something if they feel like the security is not up to snuff.
Mm-hmm. Very cool.
no gesture-based passwords. The
Yeah.
face, yes, gestures no.
Yeah. All right, so a few things that make a good password. So unique, you're not going to want to have the same password used in for multiple accounts, and that can be very difficult when the average person has, I think, 26 accounts. Hard to guess for humans and computers. So this one is going to be more apparent in a few slides, but something maybe just a few years ago even, best practice for creating passwords was something that was just very complex, lots of random characters, not necessarily very long. They used to say, okay, 8 characters is good as long as it has a certain number of special characters. But those are really hard to remember. So longer is better than something that's very complex and memorable. Okay, going on. So don't curse like a sailor is what I'm taking away from this. So even though this would be really hard for someone to remember, or guess rather, it's very hard to remember. And something like olive oil and spinach are my favorites is a lot easier for someone to recall and type. And so when that thing happened on Twitter, the conversation back and forth with the use of special characters, it is definitely correct and known that character substitutions like the @ sign for A or an exclamation point for L aren't very effective when used like that. But that, sometimes password policies call for a special character. And the most predictable place to put it is the end. So if you have a memorable place you can put it that's going to meet that policy, it's not bad practice.
I think I actually wanted to challenge the assumption that was put forth in said Twitter conversation.
Yeah.
Picking a short password with a single dictionary word where you replace a whole bunch of characters, not very effective. Putting a few additional symbols, changes, pieces of punctuation, if you have systems that accept spaces, if you have systems that accept a wide variety of punctuation, you have to be careful with multi-system passwords because, like, for example, your Birdmark password, if you get 2 blanks within it, might accept it, and then one system might blow up because it's a multi-system password. But there is an entropy add to doing the kind of substitution that that Andrew demonstrates here. It is just simply less valuable than the overall length, and that is, that's what the newest guidelines are saying, because less than 10 characters on your password can be broken in literally seconds, whereas as you add length, and if you use, if the systems that you have allow different people to have different length passwords, your entropy is much higher and it's much harder to brute force hack those passwords. So it is not that the symbols don't actually add something, they actually do. It's just not as necessary as most people are trained. And the length is more important, and not being one dictionary word is more important.
Right.
It's more complex than that one thing.
Yeah. So really all those signs point to passphrases, which in my opinion, they're the easiest to remember, and they're also the easiest way to create or increase the length of your password. So it's really just making or using whole sentences with punctuation. And when you think about it, if you Amy had a really great example of it wasn't necessarily a passphrase, but it was using the first letter of each word of a fairly long, I guess, movie quote from The Princess Bride. And
I'll actually, I'm not going to be in view of the camera, but I'll actually write on the board. So, there's multiple ways to do this. You could just use a phrase or a quote. What you probably want to do is avoid, for example, if your social media profile says, I'm a huge Shakespeare fan, and my favorite play is Hamlet. Don't use a Hamlet quote, please.
Yeah.
But so if the quote is, hello, my name is Inigo Montoya, you killed my father, prepared to die, then what you end up with is this. squeaky. And then instead of an exclamation point, you put a 1 there. You have a complex, easy to remember password with no dictionary words in it. Just say it.
Yeah, I'm gonna
You
steal
can do that
that.
with anything.
Yeah.
So that's one step removed from actually using a quote or a song lyric or a common phrase or anything else like that, which could be attached to you in other ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the challenging part for me, one of the prescriptions that I find hard to implement is making it something that's more obscure or not relevant to you, because those are like the things I think about are the things that are relevant to me. So
The other thing that you can do is you can combine two.
mm-hmm.
You know, you could say band A and band B are my favorite bands.
Mm-hmm.
As long as that's not also on your social media profile.
Yeah.
But you can combine, like, use the first half of one line and half of another line.
Mm-hmm.
You can recombining things is very helpful.
Right. How many people have seen this before? Okay, cool. All right, so have you ever used a like a password strength checker online before? It's kind of fascinating. This one is actually, it gives you a little bit more detail. So let's say I type in password to check that. I'll try to zoom in. So approximate time to crack, instant. Whereas, let's say, my combining those two ideas, centuries worth of time to crack. So these sites,
I don't know that I believe centuries, by the way.
Yeah,
I would
yeah,
say not.
they're a little
But-
exaggerated.
Well, it does take a long time, but it's also hard to keep up with the market. So
Mhm. Yeah.
take it as a long time and
Right.
bump your life.
Yeah. And also for these sites, they always have disclaimers like, "Oh, we won't record your password. Trust us." So it's best not to use your actual password, just to like check the strength
Glad you said
of your
that.
ideas. Yeah.
Yes, that was my first thought.
Well, they would never save that, track it to your IP, and try to use it on services that no.
All right. So this would have worked better with more people, but I want you guys to create a password together. So given what we've talked about,
Do you want to pull the screen up and write?
sure. Actually, I'll go over there. All right, so let's create the passwords. So let's start it off.
Once upon a time, in a land far, far away.
Galaxy far, far away.
Yes.
Alright. So I think that would be plenty long. But just thinking about, maybe I wouldn't put Star Wars, or make a Star Wars related password because I have Star Wars all over the place in my social media. But okay, so just to give you guys some ideas on how you'll create your password the next time you have to. But what we're going to talk about coming up is how you might need to create that one really strong password for your password manager. But if you're using a password manager, something that is so handy and really increases the security of all your passwords, you can randomly generate extremely strong passwords. You don't even have to look at them. You don't have to know what they are. They're stored in your vaults, and they are auto-filled in the pages that you choose to use that for. So, okay. Use it! And do you guys use multi-factor authentication for anything? Like Google, your banks? Yeah.
So there's a lot of services that provide one or more kinds of multi-factor or two-factor authentication now. If it's offered to you, it's very convenient to just say, no, I don't want to, that gives me extra steps, things like that. It really does, there comes a point where, you know, I've said it takes an instant to crack an 8 or a 9, and it's getting close to a 10-character password. There comes a point where passwords by themselves become not a thing anymore. And you're going to need to have multi-factor, and it really is the best defense, so long as you do things like keep your phone with you if you're going to be texting. It really is one of the best defenses that you can have, because even if your password is compromised on one site, there are other sites where access can't be given by just your password. So,
So, Amy,
so Jenny,
if you, given that multi-factor authentication is a bit of a pain, if you had to recommend where people absolutely do it, no, you know, versus not quite as essential, what would you say?
I think that depends a little bit on the person and how you use the services you have. I think what you need to do is think about what you store in a service and how bad it would be if you lost it, or how bad it would be if someone else got it, or how bad it would be if it were in some way damaged or republished. If you were protecting your research, that's one set of things. If you're protecting your photos, that's one set of things. If your photos are, like my father's, life of a mushroom, compared to photos of your kids or your family or something like that, you might have different values for those things. If you do something where you might be storing either your or someone else's sensitive data somewhere, then that means, where is your credit card number? Where is your, where are your passwords? So if, you know, what do I want multi-factor authentication for? My password manager.
Right.
You know, so it's, think about.
I've also heard email for that reason.
Email. People
Email
put
is the way
lots
that
of stuff in
people
their
do
email.
Password, well, also, but that's the way people do password reset. And so the last thing you want is somebody being able to hack your email because somebody could send you an email, with a new password.
Right, exactly. You know, email is, you know, we talked about phishing attacks and things like that before. Email is the biggest conduit to compromise passwords, but it's also one of the things that as hackers want to get into. But don't get me wrong, they also want your Amazon account, they want your social media accounts, they want your anything that's got a credit card number associated with it, anything that could convince them, that could convince someone else to give them more information. Any of those things are things that they're after. The services that are providing you multi-factor authentication are typically your cloud file storage services, your Dropbox, your Google Drive, things like that, your email services, and your social media services. And honestly, those are the ones you should be protecting with multi-factor, and that's the reason that those providers are offering it to you. There's also multiple levels, so in some cases you can choose, when I add it on a new computer, I want you to ask me for a code. It's one of the ways that Dropbox does it. Sometimes it's every time I access, I want you to do a two-factor authentication with me. And you can choose based on what you think the risk is, but the most important thing is for you to think of it as a risk and not think about it as a non-risk. Which, does that make sense? I know that's like a kind of weird phrase, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I think the most important thing is to think it through. Because, you know, if I'm looking at Dropbox and I'm like, well, there's nothing in there that's embarrassing or problematic, and then I think about what it would be like if I didn't have pictures of my mom anymore. Okay, now I want two-factor authentication. What do attackers do? If they get access, they don't find anything interesting, they start blowing stuff away. You know, so think about more than one way to think about your information. Does that help?
Do you use Google Authenticator?
I use Google Authenticator for specific things, one of which is our internal. But I mostly don't need to use Google Authenticator because I use 1Password, and 1Password has an authentication module for that same kind of stuff in it. And because I hate and distrust Google services. But, you know, that's a personal problem.
So if you guys haven't used Google Authenticator before, it generates a new, I guess, key for you every 60 or 30 seconds, which really increases the security of your accounts. But I was...
For those that use that type of authentication.
Right. I was watching this video, I think he was a web developer, and he uses Google services for his work, and he lost his phone, and he couldn't access his work for like a week. So that was one downside. So there's, you know, it's interesting to look at how multi-factor authentication is going to continue to evolve and improve for the consumers, because there is a large level of inconvenience sometimes.
Honestly, that's why I use 1Password rather than Google Authenticator, because then it moves with me wherever I have a 1Password installed.
Right. Yeah.
So there's, we'll talk, when we talk about password managers, we'll talk about kind of what you want in a password manager. Actually, we may have a different document or class on that. But that's one of the things you have to think about is, I'll be honest, we use Google Authenticator for one of our internal tools that we use here at Bryn Mawr, and every time I switch phones or every time I wipe my phone, I've got to have that account reset. It's a pain. If I do it through 1Password, I just don't have these problems.
Right.
So it's...
And the other thing is, the more things that you have like that, you know, am I going to remember every single one when I switch that phone or when I, whatever.
I don't have enough time in it.
Do you all have any questions or comments about creating strong passwords before we move on? I think you're all good. Okay, securing your passwords. All right, so I know we said this was a judgment-free zone, but I know a lot of you. I know you're all in lits. I still won't judge you, but how do you go about remembering your passwords?
Can I say something I used to do, and I don't really so much do it anymore, but it's more about because I work here. What I used to do is I used to write everything physically on a sheet of paper that was stayed in my house. The assumption that that would mean that somebody would have to break into my house, in which case they would have all my information, but they'd also like run into your house.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
You know, I get that as a theory. And it's not the worst theory because it's and honestly, you know, at times with my family, I have them do things like that because they cannot successfully use software. So it's better that when times come when I need access to their stuff, you know what, it's in an innocuous place in their home, it never leaves their home. Okay, that's fine. However, I say this to people, and I kind of hate to make this argument because it sounds terrible. But the people in your life can hurt you the most. And I talk to students a lot more about this, and I tend to talk to faculty and staff about this. But if you are making it easy for a person in your life to get to those things, because you get very casual about stuff in your house with people who are always in and out of your house. Okay, fine. And then something happens between the two of you, and they decide that, let's just say they don't turn out to be the person you thought they were. Now a whole bunch of bad stuff just happened to you. And I hate to sit here and be the one to make the argument that you shouldn't trust people. And I think that you should think about that as a risk. Also, other people in your life may be careless, or maybe you have somebody in your life who has Alzheimer's and is going to walk away with your notebook. I don't know. But there are things in our lives that become unpredictable. And the same way you might not leave, I don't leave my engagement ring out on the table when my cleaners come. You still want to have some caution and thought. Now, if what you said to me is, I write them all down, I stick them in an envelope, and I stick them in my home safe, I'd be like, yeah, I got nothing to say. So,
I would say also, as someone who has lived in disaster-prone areas, The other thing that makes me nervous about it is that
That's
the
fair.
possibility of losing it or being damaged, right? And so my immediate thought would be, oh, you want to make a copy and put it online, but then you're back to where you started, right?
Right. If you know you were really an offline person and you really didn't want it to be online, then what you do is you make a copy and you stick it in your safe deposit box 3 towns over.
Right.
You know, you really have to, certainly with your core passwords for things that matter. But the other thing is, if you've got a copy in your safe deposit box, now it becomes an access issue for you to go update that, so it's always wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So, there's pluses and minuses to everything. Would I rather you write it down than stick it in a Excel document that you email to yourself? Yeah, I really would. There are levels here. But I really can't complain about that as much for your personal passwords. It's not the best idea, but I've heard worse.
Well, and to the point of like being worried about losing that one hard copy you have, you can always reset your password.
Yes.
And that's a question that comes up.
You can always reset your passwords so long as you have access to 1 or 2 or 3 key accounts or objects.
Right.
So if you don't have your phone and your primary and your secondary email account are inaccessible to you, now you can't get any of the rest of them back.
Mm-hmm. There's that.
Or you have to call each and every one and try to find something to prove that you are who you are. And if, as Jenny points out, you've lived in a disaster zone, that's not going to go well.
Mm-hmm.
So there are definitely situations, you know, and people impact this a lot when a loved one either passes away or becomes unable to manage their accounts, and there isn't a password safe or a notebook or something, and now you've got to figure out how to get access to this stuff, either so you could shut it down or so you could do something with the data. Not that it's a good idea to access other people's stuff, but there are times, you know.
Right.
So
Yeah.
there's
Good
pluses
point.
and minuses to everything in life.
Yeah. All right. So saving your passwords in your browser. I think this slide's a little harsh. I was talking with Amy earlier, and I've also been reading how our browsers are really improving their security around how they store passwords, but it's still really not the most secure way to go about doing that. Nope. So the passwords that you store in your browser, they might be stored in a unencrypted, password protected file on your computer. So if anyone has access to your computer, they have access to your passwords or mobile device. So also when you're syncing your passwords to Google, you're giving your passwords to Google. And it's not to say that someone at Google is going to look at your passwords in the same way that they're not going to look at your Google Docs or things like that. But it's entrusting something that's very sensitive and valuable to that third party who you don't know the full picture.
Most browser manufacturers do not make strong statements on where the encryption happens and whether or not they can access what's in that encryption. Or if they do, the answer is yes, they can. If you're going to use something that stores online, what you want to be using is something where even the manufacturer cannot access the data because the encryption happens on your end.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot that doesn't happen in the zone with the browsers. And the other piece of it is if you're not syncing, now the only place that is on one computer, which is a different kind of risk as we're talking about single copies.
Mm-hmm.
I promise you, Let's does not guarantee that we're moving your password you stored in your browser because we don't think we should do that. That's not the only reason. It's just not something that we guarantee to do, and unless you tell us you're storing passwords there, we don't know to move that password vault. So, you know, it's easy to lose things that way, and syncing also has risk. So it's, again, is it better than I put it on my whiteboard? Yes. Is it better than other options? No.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right, so moving along to password managers. So before we dive into this, I think we're all Let's employees, so I think it's good to state that we don't officially support a specific password manager. I'm sure many of you have
Or
received
really
that
any.
question. Yeah. So this is just my opinion, Amy's opinion. I've used specifically KeyPass and LastPass. I think Amy, you've used KeyPass, and you're
I have,
Yeah.
and we use something else internally as
Mhm.
well, which is a proprietary product. But I'm a hardcore 1Password user.
hmm Yeah. So we're not going to go head to head or anything, but hopefully it does. You know.
What we've said in the past about this is there are some people, even for the Bryn Mawr jobs, for whom the use of a password manager might be a good idea, and here are some options.
Mhm.
However, we ask people to work with colleagues or to do some discovery on their own and to find out what may work best for them.
Right.
That's pretty much where we leave it. At this time, we are not going to be introducing a campus standard or introducing support for any password manager.
Right. All right. So password manager, application that stores your passwords in an encrypted vault where you have the key, and that key is your 1Password. So just in case you didn't know what encryption was, that's an example. Rosebud, plain text, encrypted. That's probably not exactly what Rosebud looks like encrypted, but I just had a little fun on the keyboard. So what password managers can do for you? So they not only can secure your passwords, but you can also store other types of data in a password manager securely. So if you have answers to your security questions, so maybe a lot of organizations or companies that ask you for security questions, it's stuff like, what was your elementary school? What was your mother's maiden name? Things that are very easy to socially engineer or just look up on someone's social media page. So it's recommended that you answer those untruthfully or just kind of like make up answers. So this is one way that you can easily store those answers that you wouldn't otherwise remember. So like I mentioned before, you can easily generate randomized passwords, controlling not only the length. So some sites might have a very unsecure password policy of 10 characters. So you can move the bar down and generate a random 10-character password. You can also control the composition. So if they don't require, or actually if they eschew your password if it has special characters, you can just uncheck that radio button and the password you generate won't have any special characters.
Can I just put a shout down to sites that do not specify what their things are?
That
and you
is,
have to
yeah.
keep Typing your password
Like,
until they're like
rejected.
It will not include. It must not have.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
must have. It's like.
Yeah. So something that is like what I see as the I don't know, the number one reason that I love password managers is it makes it easier to log into websites. So I don't have to, at least cloud-based password managers, I should specify. So cloud-based password managers have the auto login feature. There are a lot of folks on campus who are used to kind of copy-pasting their passwords from like an Excel document or something, and a more local password manager kind of mimics that, where you have to copy paste into it. There's no like browser plugin for those applications, and also it can protect you against phishing attacks. So a password manager can remember the site it's supposed to autofill. So if you click on a link that's supposed to go to your Bryn Mawr webmail and your password and username don't autofill, maybe that's a signal that it's a phishing site. And you only need 1Password. All right, so continuing the case, your passwords need to be stronger. This is chiding you. Your passwords need to be unique. Again, you have too many passwords to remember, and other methods, as we mentioned, are not as secure. So again, there are local password managers, which would be something like KeyPass, where the encrypted vault is actually on your computer or somewhere else you can store it. I store it on my H drive, so even if my computer decides to die, it's still out there on a secure server. Cloud-based, you're entrusting your passwords to a third party, but it's a little bit different than for instance, Google. So with a company like LastPass or 1Password, they don't actually have the ability to see your passwords. Only you have the keys to unencrypt that file. So a lot of people have qualms with the idea of giving their passwords to a company, but in reality, yes, they're storing it. They're responsible for storing and protecting it, but they can't access it. And even worse in the press, there was LastPass was they experienced the breach not too long ago, where a lot of the accounts were exposed. But since their encryption was strong enough, the criminals didn't actually have access to any of the passwords. So that's just a fun fact. All right.
I mean, like, the absolute ideal, right, would be if you could remember all the passwords and not have them written down anywhere. And I mean, that would still be better than a password manager, right?
Yeah, if you could remember them all.
If you have like very, you have
For many people, this is not a realistic task.
Mhm.
Yeah.
For some people there is, and I'll be honest, I mix my use of my password manager. The things that I access every day, I know all the passwords for. So I probably keep 20 or 30 passwords in my head. I'm an IT person, I probably have 110 accounts,
Right.
maybe more. And some of them I use twice a year.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, if you once upon a time, 3 years ago, bought something from Cabela's, and now you want to buy something from Cabela's again, do you really remember what your password was? And if you do, is it because it's part of a highly predictable pattern which breaks all of these rules?
Yeah.
So I think a mix and match use is totally legitimate. For example, any password you're going to have to type, you want it to be memorable. Your Brynmar password, you always want it to be memorable because it's how you log into your computer. And a password manager can't help you with that. It can help you with almost any other password, but not that one. So there may be 2 or 3 or 4 other ones where that's the case. The gentlemen in systems have a hard time because not all the password managers deal well through remote or virtual instances. So there may be several passwords in your life that you just gotta know. And you're right, the ideal would be to be able to remember all of them forever. And most people can't.
Well, yeah.
So if that's gonna be the reality, you gotta choose your code.
It still feels, I don't know, it still feels really cheesy to just be like, you have all my information from all the accounts, even encrypted. I don't know, it feels less safe to me than, I understand that encryption is much more complicated to break than.
I also think
certificates.
you're putting trust in a company to maintain your stuff, and that's really hard to do. But, and in those cases, you always want to read the terms of agreement, you always want to read those things, but you also want to think about the business model.
Yeah.
If their business model is, we provide secure passwords, and they don't, they're out of business, right? Whereas with Google, there's other things that they're doing, they're not going to die if suddenly.
Anyone who is primarily an ad company is not a safe place to store your passwords, in my professional opinion.
But for a place like LastPass or something like that, this is what they're building their whole thing on. So I'm a little bit more likely to trust them.
Right.
So for a long time, I kept a KeyPass file. I kept it locally. I put it copied periodically on a USB drive, and I threw that in a locked drawer and all of this kind of stuff. Because I have no faith in the human race or machines or anything, and I'm one of the more paranoid people you'll ever meet. However, as an IT person, when I decided that I was going to go to and at first when I went to 1Password, it wasn't cloud-based. It was encrypting a file that I was then placing in my encrypted Dropbox. So it had 2 layers of encryption by 2 different companies, and the encryption was happening keyed on my machine, keyed to me, where 1Password had no access to it and Dropbox had no access to it. So, and we just recently moved to 1Password service. I'm an IT person. I read their blog, I've read every specification that they put out, my husband follows their developers. He's a Mac and iOS developer, so that's a thing that he does. You know, I want to know the company inside and out, and I want to know that they're not, you know, tool for the Russians, or, you know, whatever the case may be. I want to know that they're really building something where they can tell me what the model is, and I believe with my professional skills that that model is secure. Do I expect every client on this campus to do that? I don't, which is why I'm willing to recommend a couple of things. But am I paranoid about that? Absolutely. So my requirements are, must be encrypted on my end, must have the only keys. The answer, if that company is subpoenaed, must be, not only will we not help you access this data, but we can't. We are actually incapable of that, which is Apple's answers for iPhones right now. You know, I won't deal with a company that believes in backdoors. I won't deal with a company that's not based in the country in which I am living or which I am a citizen. Actually, I might deal with certain EU companies because their security is actually, their belief in privacy is actually stronger than the US belief in privacy right now. But I'm particular about these things, and I applaud your willingness to be a skeptic, because I think it is totally and completely necessary. And I'm not going to tell you ever to do something with which you're uncomfortable. What I will tell you is every path you're going to take has risks, and you need to pick the risk with which you're most comfortable. Does that make sense?
I will say one other thing that led me towards password managers, and many of us in this room may not be at that point yet, but once you get to the point where loved ones might become incapacitated or no longer available, then you have the issue of, do they have things like documents, wills, you know, those sorts of things, last directives, stored someplace, where are those things, do they have them backed up and secure? And one of the things that password managers will let you do is have a family version of something, where if it is like, I'm the executor in someone's will, then I have, you know, their or a way to
even common family stuff. I'll be very honest. So I have a vault, my husband has a vault, we have what's called a shared vault for things that are actually family assets. You know? So for example, we do our taxes together. Sometimes I need to log in, sometimes he needs to log in. It actually has to be a shared login.
Yes. And I was going to say, that has been actually so helpful with, like, if, you know, who's home to call Verizon or whatever, you know, when you have one account and, you know, you have to share the password and things like that, which we have run into a couple of times where we can't just get both of us on the account. It has to be one of us, and then we have to know what security questions did I use, you know, whatever did I give them.
And that stuff's sort of in a good password manager as well.
Right. And I have yet to see, short of writing things down and putting them in a place where both my husband and I can get them, but nobody else can, you know, a really good way to do that without a password manager. So that is the one.
That's actually what sold me.
Yeah.
That's actually what sold me, was that I was frequently inconvenienced and sometimes had major problems due to the fact that only one of us had credentials for something that was critical.
Yeah.
And that's very difficult. So that may not apply to everyone.
Right.
I've heard people make the same argument for their kids.
Right.
They get their kids in a vault, but then they grant themselves access to that vault. Then, you know, I don't know if I agree with that, but I've definitely seen people do it. Yeah, you give them a lot of freedom right up until you don't, and then you give it back to them.
But some of it, it's like trying to do something where, you know, it's my email address, and so I don't remember forgot the password, but then I have to get the password, and I have to communicate it to him, and he's, you know, standing there at the whatever going,
And yeah, my husband was texting me from an airport because something had to be done.
Right.
Ridiculous.
Right.
Ridiculous.
And then I've left my phone at home, so I can't get the two-factor authentication, so I can't even do it, you know, I mean.
Well, and that's the other thing. Two-factor can only be set up on one device
Yeah.
or to a password vault.
Right.
So it's the world got to the point where both of us, as professional technologists, got to a world where we could not live without that. It got, we had this one day where it was ridiculous, and Craig basically just said to me, you're gonna use 1Password now. And I said, I can't even argue with you anymore.
Andrew, let's take maybe 5 more minutes max, just in the interest of letting everybody.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say it's yeah. I can just share the rest of this with you guys. The rest of the presentation. I have a lot of links at the end, so we didn't get to demo anything, but I'd be happy to demo tomorrow if you want to stop by.
We should bring back the password manager topic.
Yeah, just as its own thing. Linda actually has full courses on LastPass, 1Password. KeyPass is old school and has like text documentation. It's kind of representative of what it is. But I'll share that with you guys, and yeah, thank you for having us. It's nice to again talk passwords. Yeah.
I think it's clear that we could have definitely talked for much more than.
Yes,